So what did you have problems with or questions about? I'm going to pull up the report here also. The monitoring report. This is the first time you've seen a monitoring report, obviously. Because, in the CRA Academy, we don't, like in the module, we don't include this because I think it's more effective after you learn everything to do it. Otherwise, it would be too confusing. Because if you look at all the sections, it's like each of those is almost like a different module. So the question would be, well, when can we introduce this? And it really is just when you come here. And even after you meet with Chris. Because if I were to give you this before you did your thing with Chris yesterday, which was like, what, 3 hours?
Almost a day we took.
A day of
whole
Tuesday,
day of
the
him
whole
talking?
day. No. Tuesday we went through the whole thing. We find
yesterday it
our
was like
discoveries,
2 o'clock.
everything.
Yeah.
So yesterday was from, I think we started around 10
10 to 2.
10:30.
Yeah.
And he didn't record it, huh?
No, I recorded it.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Ooh.
I asked him if I could record it. He said yes.
Perfect. Thank God. Yeah, I like to share those ones, but
It's just an audio, right?
Yeah,
it's just
an
audio. It'd be a good podcast. Okay, so this is a monitoring report. What did you think about it? Like, do you think is being a monitor after seeing this report harder, you think, than you initially thought? Or is it about what you expected? When you were doing this report?
It will have been, to me, it will have kind of been easy if it's just a routine. You get what I'm saying? If it has been a routine monitoring, but now we have the whole completed project, so it's kind of tedious. But we went through it one by one, though it's time consuming. But
yeah, it is. But that's how you learn, And then all these things are interview questions. So what? Let's go through.
For me, when if I compare that what we did in Chris' office, like many things, there were errors. We need to figure it out. But here, most of them were done.
Yeah.
And SD is like Alcova.
Yeah.
Like we could read, we could understand things better than the last time one. So, when I compare, this was a little better. It's only thing, a lot of things.
It's
to go
easier,
through.
yeah.
It's a lot to go through, though.
That's by design too.
Give us so much insight, so we get more understanding when we're doing this. There's so many things that we could compare from there. Oh, Chris, so that really.
That's by design. Like Chris, he gives you studies where there's like a lot of mistakes, and then here on purpose it's not that many, because I want you to get through the thing in one day. Like if there were a lot of issues, I'd think you would still be doing it now. So we wouldn't even have time unless we're here till 10.
Even that little one is so draining.
Yeah, right?
Completely drained.
We would have been here till 10 p.m. if it was like, if you did this report on Chris's study yesterday. I mean, you literally would have been doing it till 10.
Yeah.
So
because we did that,
it's just one binder yesterday.
Yes.
It's just the
Yes.
Now we have all the regulatory everything.
But just keep that in mind though, because most sites, when you do monitor, they're not going to be that clean.
Right.
This would be like a easy visit for us. I would be done by like noon and go home. If this was, I wish it was like this. It would take me like maybe an hour. I'd be done reviewing everything by noon, like from 9 to noon. And then I would write the report another hour or two and then leave. So I'd be done by like maybe 2 o'clock. Yeah. But usually when I go monitor, it's like from 9 till 6. Sometimes I ask the site to stay later, as late as they can. And they'll kick me out like at 7 or 8.
We have to go.
Yeah, because I like to finish it there, not at home. I don't want to do it at home. When I'm at home, I'll just send them my invoice and then I'm done. And also, you're supposed to scan. I use my phone and I have this app called Adobe. It's free. You can take pictures of documents and then convert it to a PDF file. So you're supposed to email it to your lead CRA. So, like, essential documents is a perfect example. When there's a new amendment protocol amendments, there's like an average of 3 or 4 amendments a study, right? So it happens a lot. Or a new staff member joins the delegation log or the 1572. You're supposed to scan their training log, their CV, their license, their GCP, the 1572 itself, right? Like you have to like collect all these things and attach it to your report. So some CRAs used to carry like portable scanners with them, but now you just do it with this. Now some CROs don't allow you
Right.
to use your phone, so they'll give you like a device, but my CRO doesn't care, so I just use this one. And it converts, it's called Adobe Scan, and it converts like all my pictures you can crop. So if it's on a table, like you can take out the edges so you can only see the paper and not the table. And then you convert it to a PDF. So that's another thing that's time consuming even after you're done with that, you have to collect like all the new stuff. Usually it's the site visit log, like you'll go sign in that you visited the site that day. You got to scan that. Then any new staff members, delegation training, if you did a training log, scan. Sometimes temperature logs, scan. Depends on the study and on the CRO what they're requesting. Right, so it's could be time consuming. So what did you discover here? What there were not that many issues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only thing we were not knowing, how do we put our comments and what do we put in detail there?
Yes. So if basically you were checking everything, all the white boxes, it looks like. So you would have like easy comments. Like you would just say, like for staff and facilities, the CRA met with the PI.
Yes.
The PI continues to fulfill obligations as per the CRA's. Yeah, like that's just the normal stuff, right?
Start following the protocol.
Yeah. Now sometimes like you'll check a no. Like for example, sites move. Like we moved. This is a new site. We moved here like in April, but we used to be in a different place. So a lot of these studies, this one included, the one that you're monitored today, we moved, and there was one visit that the CRA had to check. Have the site moved? Yeah. What does it say?
Study facility changed.
Yes. Yes. So you would then check yes, which is shaded, right? And then you would write comments. The comments would be, the CRA and sponsor were aware that the site would move. The site moved on this date. Now, what are you looking for when a site moves? What are you concerned about as the CRA? Like probably the biggest thing, the most important thing, if a site moves.
The documents, the way they transported it to the new.
Yeah,
nothing
yeah.
is missing.
So when a site moves, okay, documents. But there's something even more important than that.
All the subjects being
The
informed
address.
and
On the new address.
Right, okay, so new address. So what does the new address trigger? What papers do they have to fill out? What regulatory documents? New address. So we moved from, I don't even remember the last address, Cowan Street in Irvine to 275 Victoria Street, Costa Mesa. Can the regulatory binder be the same? Can we use the same forms?
No,
No,
they have to
address
change
is
the
changed.
That's right. So everything. That's 1572 new. Okay. FDF new. Most importantly, informed consent new. Okay, new address. So
the next one will be the IP.
the IP. That was what I was trying to get at.
Yeah.
So the IP, investigation of product. How do I know as a sponsor if my IP is supposed to be between 58 and 72? How do I know what it was during the move? Like on a hot day like today, I mean, did they transport it in a plastic bag, in a cooler? Did somebody put it in a U-Haul? Like how? You know? And normally you don't just move. You have to request approval to move. The sponsor will then ask you for an SOP on transporting investigational product. Okay, if they're satisfied with your SOP, then they'll allow you to do it. And then usually the site will have a log on the day that they moved. So the time that it left the old address, the time that it entered the new one, by whom, and what was the temperature during that transport. Like we have like a cooler. Yeah, we have a cooler temperature control you plug into the car, like in the cigarette lighter, and you can keep it at 72 or 70, whatever you need it to be. So that's the proper way to do it. So guarantee you that CRA was doing a lot of scanning that visit, right? Even to scan the SOP for the transporting the IP. I mean, the sponsor probably already had it, but then if you're the CRA, how do you know if the site followed their SOP if you never read it, right? So you got to read it too. And if you notice that the SOP says site to record a time in and a time out, and they only do a time in, did they follow their SOP? No. And that's a finding. Well, then they would have to do a note to file, maybe a CAPA. You know what a CAPA plan?
Corrective action.
Yeah, corrective action, preventative action.
Action plans, yeah.
So what's the difference between corrective action and preventative?
You make a point of action items, and you figure out how you are going to solve that. That's your action. And prevent that, you plan such that these things doesn't repeat again.
So correct.
Correct. So like corrective action is how do you resolve it immediately for that moment, and then preventative is how do I prevent future things like this from happening? Because if you just keep letting the same thing happen and the FDA happens to audit, I mean, that's not good for the site, not good for the sponsor, not good for the CRA. If it's a safety thing, it's not good for the patients.
Right.
If it's that bad, the FDA may not even accept that data.
True.
So now it's a lot of time, money, resources wasted on data that's not usable. Because at the end of the day, all a research clinic does is sell data to sponsor.
Right.
Like we collect data and we sell it to, they pay for it and we give them the data. If that data is not good, what are we selling? They can't get a refund either. So that's the problem. So that's why they hire you guys. To make sure, okay, they made a mistake, but how do we make sure this doesn't happen like all the time? That's a capital plan, okay? What if you meet, PI oversight? Like, what do you know about PI oversight?
Making sure all the delegation logs and everything and the trainings what he gives to the staff up to date. Their certifications are up to date.
Yeah.
All
And
their trainings.
All the labs form must be signed by the PI to say that the PI is overseeing everything.
Right. What if the PI says, no, I have another doctor sub-I sign all the labs?
If he's on delegation log, I guess he can.
So he can, but it still
PI
should be encouraged to co-sign,
Right.
to acknowledge that he
Co-sign, yeah.
reviewed, right? Because you'll get that a lot too. Like the doctor will tell you, well, no, my MD sub-I will do it, and they're just as capable as me, if not more. And you say, that's fine, but
End of the day, it's his responsibility.
yes, and you've got to, it would be in your best interest to acknowledge everything. What about like progress notes and stuff like that? You should see
that's-
PI,
Yeah.
right? And if you don't, what do? You have a conversation with the PI, right? That will come up in the interviews too. They're going to ask you about like what are some strategies you do to communicate the importance of PI oversight for your sites. So you gotta, I mean, that's the answer I just gave you. You just gotta communicate that. If a bad answer would be, I don't know. I mean, if you don't know that, like, yeah, you should be applying for a different job. Now, inclusion, exclusion criteria, all right? IE criteria. So what do you do if you notice that a site randomized the subject and they're not aware, but you are, because you reviewing it, that that subject actually should not be in the study? What do you do in that case?
He should not be in the study and he is participating.
Yeah. So the site, they must have ignored an IE criteria.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they were busy and didn't check one
That's
box.
a deviation.
Right. But what do you do as a CRA? Because you're the one discovered this. What do you do?
You talk to the PI.
Right. But what if the PI says, no, don't worry about it. I'm a doctor, you're not, and it's okay.
So I'll just escalate it to my manager. Medical monitor.
Medical
That's
monitor.
safety concern.
Medical monitor. Very good. Medical monitor. By the way, you guys took that final, right? The last final? Did you think it was hard?
We're still going to talk on that.
Yeah?
We're still
have a
going
lot
to
to
talk
talk
on that.
You guys did it. I think you guys did good, though. You both passed, which is really good. I think it was hard, too.
Yeah. We discussed with Chris yesterday. We were like,
Oh,
we'll talk to
okay.
you when we get here. So
I forgot to ask you. Yeah, Chris failed the first time, but we changed a bunch of questions. It used to be 100 questions, and we removed like 33 because there was like somewhere he missed the ones that were like weird, and I wouldn't expect the students to know that. But yeah, the 67 we have there I think are fair, but it was tough.
It was tough. And you guys need to do some little changes in the formatting.
Yeah.
First, if somebody's going into the link, let them know how many questions they're going to take. So
Oh.
because immediately you enter you press the link, it just takes you down and start counting down.
Yeah.
So it didn't
You
prepare
should
you for
mention,
anything.
you click
This
the
is
exam starting.
67.
This is 67 question and you have 1 hour.
Yeah.
So immediately, unknowingly, anybody just click on it, you start counting.
What did
down.
the email say? It's timed.
They just said that once you start, you have 1 hour to complete.
Okay, so it said the time, but it didn't say the
It
number
didn't
of
say the
questions.
number of questions.
Forgot to put that.
So we know we resolved that by the time we see you today.
One
That needs to be
student,
resolved.
one student clicked it because she was curious,
Mhm.
and then left thinking she can do it again, and she got like a 0. But we allowed her to retake it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Georgina too mistakenly, because we were
Yeah.
same sex, she mistakenly clicked. She
Yeah.
said she was not prepared for it, so
No.
but she failed.
Of
She
course,
said she
that's the
returned,
one.
so-
Yeah, but we're letting her retake it.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, she had some like outside issues, so she's gonna take it longer. She has longer to take it. But yeah, so you guys did good. I mean, see, that's the benefit of that. Is like, if you do well on that, you already know a lot of this stuff. It's just a matter of packaging it for an interview, right? And you're gonna get more experience when you're interning in Baltimore and in you're from Baltimore?
Yeah.
Okay, Baltimore and Atlanta, right? We have actually some good sites out there. Okay, this is one that happens all the time. Informed consent. Okay, so what happens? What happens when a protocol gets amended? Because it happens 3 or 4 times per study on average. What's the first thing you as a monitor
The
need to look for?
informed consent
The
again.
new version of the informed
Yes.
consent.
And who has to re-sign that?
Yeah, the subject has to resign it at the next available visit
After-
after it was after the new consent. They need to reconsent the
Yes.
subject with the new.
Only
informed
new
consent
subjects
form.
or all subjects?
If a new subject is coming in, we use the latest version.
Yeah.
And all the old subject, they will reconsent them with the new.
Okay.
The new one.
What if a subject completed the study
Completed already before.
Yeah. before the
before
new one came out?
Completed and done completely.
Yeah.
That's it.
Good.
That's it. It's done already. So
Good,
we need to
good.
reconsent.
I'm trying to confuse you there.
Oh, okay.
That's good.
It's after that IRB approval, right?
Yeah, so it has to get IRB approval, and also when the site moves,
Mm-hmm.
technically the IRB has to approve it.
Yeah.
So there's a form that the sites send. It's
Mhm.
called a. Actually, IRB has a separate one when you move. It's called change of address form.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't need to reapply. Like You guys know when a site gets activated, they need IRB approval.
Mhm.
Do you know how they get that? They're every IRB, no matter which one, they have a website portal, and they have all the forms you will ever need as a site there for your protocol, and you're supposed to log in with username and password for your site, and then you find, in the case of a site activation, the site is responsible for submitting that to the IRB, not the sponsor. So the site will print out or download the initial review form for the IRB. They're called different things. Sometimes it's called a site approval form, initial review report, and you fill out everything. They're going to ask you, I'll show you an example of one. Actually, in the reg binder there is too, but there's, PI, how many studies is the PI doing at the moment? How many years of experience do they have? Then they ask about the coordinators, the same thing, and then the sub-Is, the same thing. And then they ask when's the latest GCP training, like just all the usual stuff. But it ends up being about 10 pages of questions they ask, and how many patients you're overseeing, and all your studies combined. Because the IRB is concerned with making sure that you have the appropriate resources to oversee safety. And they don't care about anything else with the study, just patient safety, right? And the IRB also has to approve the protocol for the sponsor. So if there's any part of the protocol that could be improved to improve patient safety, like if there's something called unnecessary risk to patient, and IRBs make sure that you're avoiding that. Like there should be no unnecessary risk at all, right? I know like in India and in Africa a couple years ago, this made like national news, right? They would put patients with cancer and give them placebo without telling them. In the United States, you can't do that. You have to give, because that's unnecessary risk.
You have to give them the real
Yeah,
treatment.
that's unnecessary risk. Now, if it's something that's not life-threatening, you can use placebo. Most studies use placebo. But if it's a life-threatening, right, you have to have standard of treatment. Even if there is a placebo in some cases, there should be rescue medications allowed in the protocol. So if a patient's not doing well because they're on placebo, there are like rescue medications that the site can prescribe. So the IRB is all about patient safety. Okay. Recruitment. This will be an interview question too. Because recruitment is an issue for just about every study and almost every site. So they're going to ask you in an interview, what have you done? What are some things you have done in the past to help your sites recruit more subjects? What are some strategies? I was asked this in an interview. This was one of the many questions they asked me. You know how I said they were kept going one after another? That was one of them. What do you do with recruitment? Like, what have you done in the past with recruitment as a CRA? And there's really no wrong answer other than you get scared and don't say anything. You can almost say anything that comes to your mind is okay. Because really a CRA can't do much other than encourage the site. But you can maybe make the site aware that they have a recruitment budget. Sites, sometimes they're not even aware in their contract. They're given a budget for advertising. But they don't just give you that money. You have to request it. Okay, so maybe the site is too busy, the coordinator's too busy, doesn't even know that they have that, or the business person doesn't talk to any of the staff and the business person has the contract. So none of the research staff know that they even have this. So that's your job as the CRA to let them know. If they're having issues with recruitment, you should say, hey, did you know that you have a advertising budget in your contract? I've even had some CRAs with me when I was early on send an email to the budget person from the sponsor to introduce me, like to get to get that process going. Rather than me going to look in my contract and finding who I need. She just did it. So that's a strategy that works, right? Another one is sharing best practices with other sites, because it's very likely you'll be monitoring multiple sites, not just one. So maybe one of your sites is doing particularly good in recruitment, and you can figure out how and share some of those strategies with your struggling sites. Those are all good answers for this question, right? The only bad answer on that one is you don't know, because that's any CRA who's been doing this long enough has had to have that conversation with the sites. Do you know the difference between SDV and SDR?
Yeah.
Okay. Vince going through that? Who did that? Shanae?
I
Shanae?
think so. Yeah, I think so.
Shanae. This was like, you guys were in March, right? The March? That was the most technically awful class we've ever had. We had like 3 any meetings didn't work.
Yeah.
That was like the worst one we have had. So bad. I think any meeting did like a complete refresh of their system twice. And then re-get at the end the CRA coach. Did you guys do that one?
Yeah.
I mean, he had to do his own because he couldn't log in.
Yeah, because he couldn't log in. We were there waiting.
It was just one problem after another. But yeah, so Shanae went over that. Must have gone over SDV and SDR with you guys. So SDV is easy, right? Like, yeah, I mean, anyone can do that. Like, you can be a high school dropout and know how to do SDV. But SDR, that's where you earn your money. Because it's all the exceptions, right? It's not just like SDV you see on the source, they weigh 120 pounds, and in the EDC you see 120 pounds. That's not hard, right? Like my nephew can do that, he's like 6. But SDR, what if their height and weight is a BMI that's exclusionary? But the EDC doesn't even ask for a BMI. Okay, so in the EDC in that source, it looks good because no one's doing the BMI calculations. But in the protocol, it says no BMI over 35. But it's not listed anywhere in the source or the EDC. So you're thinking it's no problem if you don't do the math yourself and figure out, no, this is exclusion criteria number 20. Right? That's SDR, and there's thousands of things like that for every study. Like in the schedule of assessments and the protocol, you see all those little footnotes. Like my favorite thing in any protocol is the schedule of assessments. It's that one page. If you don't know anything about a study and you go to a site, that's all you need to do like a decent job. Okay, you're still gonna miss some things maybe, but like you're not gonna be awful. Okay, so you have the schedule of every visit, shows you exactly what needs to be done. You don't see the IE criteria there, but you see like the footnotes, which will explain, a good example is blood pressure or ECG. Like sometimes ECGs need to be taken in triplicate, so every 2 minutes, or every 2 minutes of blood pressure, sitting, supine. Like you'll see all those things in the footnotes. So that's where like SDR comes into effect. And if it's not documented in their source, like how do you know that they did that? Right. You won't know. So then what do you do if you're noticing a site is not documenting, but they're saying they did something, right? But they're not documenting it. Well, that's when you have to have the conversation with the site and say, hey, you should at least do a note to file or add it to your progress note. PIs should have a progress note for every visit, but also the coordinators should have a progress note too. We have Monica here who's the coordinator and Kobe who's going to be a coordinator soon. He's an assistant now. But they're going to write progress notes for every visit because if the PI misses something, the coordinator knows what belongs, right? And the PI is not going to write about technical things. Like, the PI is not going to write, we did a blood pressure in triplicate, sitting, supine, and sitting every 2 minutes. They're not going to say that. But the coordinator, if it's not put in the actual source, the coordinator should write that in the study coordinator notes. What about process of consent? What is that? What's a process of consent?
Yeah, the subject is introduced to the protocol, the benefits, the risk. It was made to understand everything about the protocol.
Mm-hmm.
It was given enough time to study or to read the protocol and understand. Maybe it was taken home to share with his family friends or share with his physician.
Mm-hmm.
And he came back with it. He asked the questions. All the questions were given answers to in a satisfactory manner. Then he signed the informed consent.
It's good. Very good. Where'd you learn that from? The module?
I started learning from February. I joined your class in March, right?
March.
We started in
March.
yeah.
So that was in the, we covered that?
June class.
Yeah, it's not March.
It's not
Oh,
March.
what
That
am
was
I
June.
thinking?
June, July, August. Yeah.
June was the most technologically crazy class.
Mhm.
March was okay. Yeah, June. Wow.
Started
Yeah,
learning
it's already.
Started learning since March, since February. But I joined your academy in June.
I see. Yeah, we're already in September class now. That's crazy. Okay, so good. So you learned that in the one of the modules? That's good. That's exactly what process of consent is. But how do you know that the site, how do you know that the site did that?
Yeah, apart from the form being signed, all that, they have to document the process of consent.
Correct. And how would they do that?
That should be in writing.
Yeah. So it could be typed, written, as long as it's there.
Mhm.
You know, I have some sites when I monitor, they just scribble. But it's good enough because it shows, if you really want to read it, you can see allowed plenty of time, not coerced. That's an important one. They're not coerced. They were explained all the risks, benefits. They were made available of other options.
Yeah, no options.
Right. So you want to make sure coercion is important. You don't want to coerce subjects. Okay, AEs. So adverse events. How do you know when something is an adverse event or just part of the medical history?
Adverse event, when we will know when physician does the causal relationship between the reaction what he had seen, is it because of the drug what they're testing
Mm-hmm.
or not? Usually he would give the conclusion.
Right. Let's say my medical history, let's say I'm in a study, okay,
Mhm.
and my medical history shows migraines.
Mhm.
Okay, so now it's part of medical history. So now if I have a migraine during a study
Mhm.
and the coordinator writes migraine, is that a AE or is that a medical history?
It's a medical history.
Okay.
But if it aggravates because of this, they'll have to check.
So if the PI believes it's an exacerbation of the migraine,
Sorry, yeah?
if the PI believes it's an exacerbation of the migraine. So let's say the coordinator wrote subject had a migraine, but the PI believes this is part of medical history, then that's fine. That's medical history.
Mhm.
But if the site writes subject complained of increased migraines more frequently than they've experienced before,
Mhm.
what is that?
That's an AE.
That's right. That's right. And if they might try to argue with you and say no, it's part of medical history, and then
This is increased.
It's more frequent.
Yes.
It's increased.
it's
so
an exacerbation of existing medical history. And medical monitor can be consulted with the PI.
Mhm.
They can have a conversation. But that's the main difference.
Mhm.
How the site documents it. And if they didn't document it clearly, you can query it. Can you follow up on the extent of the migraine. Is this AE or is this medical history?
Mhm.
And they should document it clearly
Right.
for an auditor to see it
Mhm.
and be able to understand. Right? That's very important. You'll see that a lot. What about SAEs? Serious adverse events.
You report depending upon the degree of the events what you see. They have the scale, like it's a death or life-threatening hospitalization, congenital anomalies, and or they have any medically significant problems. So depending upon the range in that scale, you report it immediately.
Mm-hmm. And what's the process like for the site when the SAE occurs? So what's the process?
Once the SAE occur,
As far as
they have
reporting.
they have to report 24 hours after notification.
Okay.
24 hours. Immediately they're aware they have 24 hours from that time.
To report to who?
To the sponsor and the RIP.
Okay,
It's
good.
a serious
Good.
adverse event.
If it is serious, the first and second one,
Yeah, so initial and then follow up.
Mm-hmm.
The initial needs to be like as soon as possible, like within 24 48 hours, depend on the protocol, right? The follow up could be much later,
Mm-hmm.
right? You taking off?
See you tomorrow.
See Monica. Monica's going to show you IP reconciliation tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah? The follow up can be a little bit longer. It's when the SAE is resolved,
Mm-hmm.
or if it's still ongoing, you need to do a follow up and say it's still ongoing. And then at closeout visit, one of the main things you're doing is seeing if all SAEs have been resolved.
Right.
Because if you still have ongoing SAEs at closeout, you need to have like a resolution, or it could still be ongoing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or it could just be part of a new medical history at this point. Like if it's if someone got HIV, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a SAE, but is it ever going to be resolved? No. So then you move that to medical history at the end of the study.
True.
This is now part of subject's medical history. So it's like those kind of tricky things that is where like you show your value and as a CRA, like that's what they're paying you for. If it was as simple as SDV, I mean, they wouldn't have a shortage of CRAs. You just hire anybody to do that. But it's not the SDV, it's all this other stuff. And it's always like exceptions.
Mm-hmm.
And then sites, sometimes it's very tough. Like the medical history AE is sometimes very tricky.
Mm-hmm.
Like doctors will argue, and then, there's really not much you can do other than document in your report that you made them aware of it. Because now the FDA is allowed to audit not only the site, they've always been able to, but the monitoring reports. So if there was an AE that actually was, or if there was a medical history exacerbation that should have been AE, maybe even a SAE, and the site never reported it, and you never comment about it in your report, and the FDA audits, the site gets in trouble, but then the CRO also gets in trouble, and the sponsor gets in trouble, really, for not having oversight of their monitors. And then that comes back to you. Like, they're going to look immediately, who is the CRA? And why is she still working on this study? So that is like that is what's going to protect you in your job, that report. Always write more than you think you need to.
Even Chris told us that in case there are situations like that, whereby the doctor, you can't really confront them, like they'll push back. But for some clarification, sometimes we could reach out to the medical monitor that,
Yeah.
I saw this, is this something
Yes.
significant that I have to, so.
But you want to comment about
the
that.
report.
You don't just not say anything. Because then if an auditor sees it, they say this person didn't do anything. Even if you did. But if it's not written down, you didn't.
That we
Right?
communicated with the medical monitor, we need
Yeah.
to mention that.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can just leave it alone and say, I'll fix this next time I come. Because you'll forget next time.
Right.
You will forget next time. No matter how good you are. Well, you may not, but you don't want to run that risk. So like I was talking with Monica about IP accountability, right? She's going to show you how to do that. Reconciliation. So every protocol, this one included, has a percentage of compliance for the subjects. Okay. Now, were you guys aware of that, like compliance percentage for patients?
Yeah, it's in they stated it in the subject binder.
Yeah.
For every
Usually it's like plus or minus 10% or 20, depending on how far apart each visit is from the other, right? So they account for patient forgot a few times, or patient took too many because he was feeling extra sick, so he wanted to take double. Like those are okay as long as they're within that percentage of over or under, right? Now, how do you know if that's actually the case? What if the site doesn't know how to do math properly and says, "Oh yeah, everyone's been 100% compliant"?
We check the medications.
Yeah.
We count them.
Physically have to count pills,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like that's IP reconciliation if it's an actual pill. If it's like an infusion or an injection, it's much easier. And that's why those treatments actually are better in real life, because compliance is 100%. If there's any error, it's on the person administering it, not the patient, right? The patients make mistakes. I forget to take my meds all the time. That's it. I'm horrible at compliance. But with an injection or infusion, it's not the case. But you still have to do reconciliation for those kind of IPs too. You just confirm that it's been used properly, and if it's only blinded, or if only the person administering the IP is unblinded, in the cases where you can tell if it's placebo or not based on the color, right? That means only that person administering the infusion or injection is aware. That person can't do anything else on the study. That's called the unblinded person. And there's also blinded people that can only do one thing and nothing else. Okay, like I, for one of these studies starting, I think it's Alzheimer's study also, I'm a blinded rater. So I'm doing, I think it's the CDR. It's a rating scale. Okay, it's like a 10-minute rating scale. I'm not allowed to do anything else with that study, not even help recruit patients, because they don't want me knowing anything about the patient outside of that scale. Like they don't want me to see what meds they're getting, or even like what visit they're on sometimes, or who they are, like anything about their medical history, nothing. So that's a blinded person, but there's also unblinded people, usually when they administer the infusions or the injection, because they can actually see the difference. And they're supposed to cover the infusion during the procedure. So there's someone that can be unblinded that prepares the IP, like the injection, for the doctor. But then they have to like cover it with a bag. Like the sponsor will provide some kind of cover so that whoever's administering it can't see. Right? And you as CRA, depend on the protocol, you have to make sure that they're doing these things. Right? You won't be there obviously for every infusion.
So how do I check that?
You just got to make sure that it's covered, like when the used vial, that it's covered, right? And the site can also document exactly how they did it. Like, are the blinding procedures being properly maintained? You don't want undue influence to cloud someone's judgment on research, right? Temperature excursions we talk about already. So when a site moves. But what about if you notice that the site is not maintaining the temp log, and you went to go see the temperature yourself that day, and the thermometer says 83 and the maximum is 77? So you know that day it's 83. Maybe it was like that on previous days too. What do you do with that IP as the CRA?
If it is a big difference as per the protocol, I don't think you can inject that to the subject.
But they already did. Because there's been visits, or not injections, but just pills.
It's
Okay.
whichever one. It's already above this temperature range, so that is a protocol deviation.
Correct.
So I have to report it. I'll make notes. I'll let them know, and I have to escalate it to my manager.
Yeah. It's definitely a deviation, alright? Even if it's 1 degree above. Deviation. Now the question, that's not a question. Now the question is, can those patients who took those affected medications be allowed to continue taking them?